Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of the Working Ant with me, your host and coach, Rami Balut. What a pleasure it is to spend my time with you. Thank you so much for investing your time with me. If you're in California, I hope you're staying safe and dry from all these pretty intense storms we're having. And if you're anywhere else in the country or around the world, I hope you're doing well. Hope you're in health and high spirits always. Today is one of my favorite topics, really, of all time. I really, really, really enjoy this topic. I talk about it a lot with my clients one-on-one, whether it's with interviewing, whether it's with just reaching out and networking and meeting new people for the very first time, going to events, or really just getting to know some colleague or cross-organizational, cross-functional partner or stakeholder at work much more intimately and in a much more authentic, immersive, and experienced way. And that is the topic around likability, personability, this idea of you coming across as someone who truly is an individual where you really want to be investing your time with, or at least at minimum, having a joyful experience every time you interact with you. And so, I just wanted to ask you, have you ever thought of that person that you're like, man, every single time I talk to him, or every time I talk to her, just something good happens. It's like, when we connect, something happens, something good happens. Just that feeling, that emotion, that joy that you actually have when you're speaking with somebody. And I just feel like it's just such a beautiful thing. And I'm sure you must have at least one person you could think about where you'd say to yourself, if I was in a room having a meeting with this individual amongst a sea of other people, and this particular person said nothing whatsoever, the fact that this person is in the room just makes me feel at peace, makes me feel safe, makes me feel happy, makes me feel heard, understood, acknowledged, recognized, even if they said nothing whatsoever. And that is the power, the true power of somebody that actually has a large amount of likability. And likability is key. If you're speaking to a recruiter or a hiring manager and they just like you, man, they're going to go out of their way for you. And if you're speaking to somebody in a transition, well, and you're negotiating perhaps, your overall total compensation, if they like you, they'll more than likely do something to get you to come in with a little bit of extra cash, for example. Likability goes a long way. Likability, by the way, even if you were to have no transactional relationship with somebody, just having a level of likability breeds an amount of emotional influence over somebody, which we all, wish we could actually have this level of influence over an individual without even having a level of authority or even some dependency or even interdependency on this relationship. Just having an amount of likability can go a long way. And by the way, this could be something that you could use in the future. When you call on somebody, when you message somebody, it's, I just want you to imagine that person who writes you, messages you, and, and you're automatically thinking, my gosh, I feel so great this person has messaged me. It's like the difference between somebody showing up in your inbox and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to open this and just see what's going on. Even if I don't read a thing, just the name of this person in my inbox, generates such a large amount of joy. You know what I'm talking about. You must know what I'm talking about when I talk about likability, because, there are others like that come into our inbox. You're like, okay, I'll read this later. I'll read it. I'll flag it, pretend I didn't even read it. And then I'll read it again when I really, really have to read it. Or perhaps if I don't even have to, not read it at all and just move on with my life. So you sort of know the differences between someone who's highly likable and someone is not. And many of times it has to do with the perception we actually have of these people. They're coming into our lives for a specific reason. They're giving us knowledge. They're giving us an uplifting sort of statement. They're reviewing our work. They are reaching out to ask for assistance, or better yet, provide assistance. This sort of audit of how these individuals that we find likable in our lives comes together in a very, very interesting way. And many of it has to do with the way we view ourselves. The reflection of ourselves upon someone else very much determines on how we feel about that person. It's like, going into someone's LinkedIn profile and looking at their recommendations. And, for those of you that have been listening to the Working Ant for years now, you know exactly where I'm going with this. But it's literally like a no fail. Like you'll just go to their recommendations that they've given and you'll say like, my gosh, this is what they actually value in other people's relationships. And because this is actually what they value in other people's relationships, it's so obvious that this is what I'm going to be speaking to them about the next time I actually talk to them. Or perhaps maybe if I'm trying to prepare for an interview of some sort, and I'm thinking to myself, how can I actually speak to this person's values? Well, it's literally right there. And that makes us become so much more likable, right? When we do it in a genuine and authentic way. So there's always this idea of like likable, being likable, likability, personability, this idea of like connecting with someone. And there's so many benefits to it. And yet, like so many of us actually don't do a good job of really investing our time and trying to figure out how on earth can we be likable to specific individuals, especially the ones that we actually need. It's usually like a chance thing. It's like I'm in the elevator with somebody and I'm thinking to myself, yeah, I probably won't start a conversation with this person without even knowing anything about this person's background. It's just that feeling. Sometimes we're in the elevator with someone we actually do want to have a conversation with. We're like, how on earth are we going to do that? And like, hope we don't slip up. Hope we don't say anything that's going to make us sound less than likable. Likability is a foundational, at times existential quality that we must be able to have and acquire and do better at as we go and we grow in our professional careers. And for the leaders in us, well, that's obvious, right? If we have a level of likability and personability, we can breed a much stronger connection. It's much easier for us to ask for things from our team. It's much easier for us to ensure that, hey, you know what? We are one of those individuals who are in others' proximity that is beneficial to one's life. There's so many benefits to this idea of likability, but what I want to get into today is just like really three things that I feel that are really great at thinking outside of the box on likability. So I'm not going to go into like how you look or like how you sound, your tone, your emotional state, your physiology. Even though those things are extremely important, I usually get in those in much deeper conversations with my clients. But here, think about these three things as it relates to likability. And actually, thinking about these three things will go much further on the likability side of things. So number one, I think in order for anyone to be likable, you've got to have an exceptionally strong self-efficacy. And if you don't have a strong level of self-efficacy, I just don't think this idea of you being likable at all is going to pan out for you outside of where you currently stand at the moment. So if I don't believe that I'm capable of doing something and actually accomplishing it in a very positive way here, the likelihood of me actually going out of my way to deliberately and intentionally be likable with somebody, it's really not going to work. I'm going to be a lot more self-conscious of myself. I'm going to be thinking to myself like, well, what if this doesn't go well? What if this doesn't go right? And that's sort of like why a lot of people, shy away from like opportunity, even though deep down inside, they would love to build a strong relationship with somebody, but they're scared of getting hurt. And so for that reason, and that reason alone, they sort of shy away from it. They handicap themselves, as they say in psychological terms. And in many ways, that just prevents them from being in a position of failure. So self-efficacy, no surprise here, is essential for you to be likable. I need to believe in my abilities. It's as simple as that. I need to believe that I am capable. I need to believe that I and myself alone am worthy of actually getting closer to somebody's sphere of proximity where me being involved in some way, somehow, is going to be beneficial for that individual. And I really, really want you to take note of this as it relates to your ability to think through this idea of, hey, how can I become much more likable? And self-efficacy is key. We don't have that, we're not going to get very, very far. Another thing on likability that I think is really, really important, probably one of the more crucial things, but not as important as number one, is definitely the idea of sustainability, longevity, quality relationships. We can't start something unless we are willing to sustain it if it is something we want of quality. And so if we're going to start something, might as well keep it going. And if we're going to keep it going, it's got to be something of quality. So I don't want you to just be likable for the sake of being likable, being jumpy, being happy, being whatever it is that you believe is like your likable, authentic self. But then pretend to put that authentic self on, like mask it with something else. And then suddenly, when you're interacting with someone who in some way depends on you for the level of perception that you've presented to them over the course of time, and all of a sudden they find themselves saying to themselves like, "Hey, what's wrong? Is everything okay? Are you doing all right?" How many times have you got yourself into a situation like that? I'm sure many of times it's authentic. You could be getting over a cold, like I am, getting over a flu. You may be thinking to yourself like, "Hey, you know what? Something is wrong with me. Something isn't right. And you know what? Something happened earlier today. I could share what that is with you." But other times you're like, "Well, really? Like, there's nothing wrong. I'm totally fine. There's nothing going on. I'm doing just fine. And so there's nothing really, really wrong with me." And you may get into moments like that, but at times, if you realize like who the person is you're speaking to, and interacting with, this person must have been dependent on you some way to show up in some way that is very much aligned to what they thought you were all about to begin with. And so if you're looking to promote yourself at work and you're posting in these public channels about like leadership and growth, or let's just say taking deep breaths and taking care of your physiology so you can be a better producer at work, these are all great things. But if you can't sustain them over the long run, I encourage you not to start them at all. In fact, it actually hurts you, I believe, in the long run. When you're starting something you can't sustain, and people are going to be like, "Hey, whatever happened to her? Whatever happened to him? I thought there was something around that." Not only that, on the genuine authentic side of things, we can't say things at work. I mean, we can say what we want to say at work, but we can't really say things at work that in many ways are not aligned to like how we're actually showing up. So if you're not showing up in a way that's aligned to what it is you're putting out there in the forms of like information or articles or whatever it is you're trying to put out there, if you're not doing that, I just think that's a disservice to yourself, like at minimum. And this level of like inauthenticity, it doesn't really get you very far career wise. Same can be said when you're actually interviewing. If you're meeting a recruiter and you show up in a particular way and the recruiter writes notes and the hiring manager you speak to next is going to say to you, like, "Hey, this person is not what you said he or she was." Well, that's not good. And if you're on the other side and you're actually interviewing and you're looking for specific things in a candidate, you probably want to be thinking to yourself like, "Hey, you know what? I want to be consistent with what it is that I'm looking for. It may not just be, how I feel about a particular person, but there must be established principles that other people may know and expect of me when I'm actually interviewing." And so sometimes you'll find like people at work are called to do specific things, and not just because they've been able to establish themselves as someone who can do particular things over a course of time consistently. And so number two, if you're not being able to, sustain something in a form of like quality over time, well, don't start it at all. On the likability side of things, if you're deliberately trying to reinvent yourself, and you're unable to do so in a very compelling way. Typically, this has a lot to do with a pain versus pleasure scenario. If it's so painful for us to go back to a particular place, we'll be much more inclined to and motivated to continue down a path that we chose for ourselves versus, what, it's a nice to have, but it's not a must to have. And therefore we can go on and whatever happens, happens. So I think I've made my point clear here. If we can't sustain it, don't do it. Don't start it. It's not to say don't experiment, but experiment with the idea that, hey, if this works, I'm going to have to keep this up, because consistency is key when it comes to performance. And third, here, which I think is a really, really big, golden nugget when it comes to likability, I like to call this opening the doors to childhood. And I want you to imagine the next time you actually speak to someone try to, many of us actually would like to go back to like these days in our normal lives, but I've tried to take someone's age back to high school or even to early childhood and ask yourself, what kind of a person must this individual have been? Were they the same? Did they seem like they sort of evolved into the personality that they are today? Is it, you know, aligned and authentic to what it is they're actually telling me? These small cues that you can get from an individual from their childhood can very, very, very much give you an indication of what they value today as leaders, as contributors, as peers, as hiring managers, recruiters, as your clients even. And the reason why I say this is because, there's so much data that is behind the idea of bringing our childhood into work. And many psychologists, leading psychologists, psychotherapists, researchers will say we bring our values from childhood into work. And our values, by the way, are typically created from the voids that we had growing up. And if you can wrap your head around that idea, well, my gosh, are there endless possibilities for you to consider as you are trying to deliberately become more likable, building more trust, a level of personability between yourself and whomever your audience is going to be. Again, whether this is your manager, your direct reports, your peers, a hiring manager, a recruiter, your clients, whomever they are. I typically like to do this because it gives me a sort of purity and essence of the individual that I'm going to be speaking with, outside of these layers upon layers of social conformity and transformation that happen over the course of time. And so if we're able to actually bring back this level of childhood to the individual we're speaking to, well, how much more likable can we be, knowing that, the essence of this individual is anchored on a few values and principles in their lives that typically are not explicitly said, but implicitly felt. And so with that said, I really, truly hope you found value in this. Likability is a beautiful thing. We all want to be more likable. We all want to be more loved. And by the way, we all want to feel more loved in the way we work and interact. And so likability is just a start, but it's a strong, strong, strong start. And you get that right, you get it done authentically. I could tell you that you'll probably close that next deal, convert that next job interview, and get closer to the person you've been yearning to get close to, whether it be at work or in your personal lives. And with that said, thank you so much for tuning in. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you soon here on The Working It. Bye for now.